about the impacts on flood or on rivers and flooding tomorrow once we see how much has fallen. I do have a little bit of brief good news that the rain will let up for the middle of the week. We will get a break as those rivers continue to rise, but then we are looking at potentially more later this week, particularly Thursday night into Friday. How much falls, where the heaviest will fall, still a little early. Right now, we're not seeing signals that this rain would be nearly as severe as what happened last week, resulting in this major flooding. But any additional rainfall at this point is just going to add to the floodwaters. The ground is saturated. It has nowhere to go. So whatever falls, as little as it may be, will only make things a little worse. Heading even further into the future, we are still seeing signs that this pattern could continue. This is a result of that heat dome you've heard about impacting the East Coast, which has put us on the west side where the storm track is just relentless. Whether or not this continues to exacerbate the flooding problems will yet to be seen. We'll, of course, hope for the best as we go into the weeks ahead, but we will also be equally prepared for any additional impacts that could occur heading into the weeks and hopefully not months ahead, but we will just have to see how that goes. Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and you're hearing the reality of the situation, and I think even like here in St. Paul, as of now, water levels are right between minor and moderate flood stage at about 14 feet. Major flood stage is 17 feet. We're predicting later in the week to be at 20 feet. So just to start wrapping your minds around this, in some cases, as we said, these are unprecedented, not seen before type of events that are coming on very quickly. The good news is the resources are there. The communities are ready. We will do all we can on the preventative side of it. And then I know people want to try and get back to normal as close as possible. That assessment stage, crop damage, crop assessments, all of those things, road damage will start to happen. But our commitment is to keep people safe and to rebuild. With that, any of these folks up here would be glad to answer a question. If you could be specific of who you want, it might help.
Governor, how much money, you mentioned the fund at the beginning, I'm sorry, I don't know these Michelle Wilson, from the Star Tribune. How much is in that?
Yeah, there's $26.24 million in that right now. I want to thank the legislature this year. This is something that's been around for a while. I've used it a dozen times a year. I'm able to authorize. If the request comes in, we assess it. I'm able to sign off and get the money to the counties. That reimburses 75% of the county's costs. The good news was the legislature this year, we asked for this and they did it. It will replenish to $50 million after the end of August. So we will have another $50 million at the start of September. That disaster assistance contingency account is for areas where we don't get a federal disaster declaration. I think many of you have been through this before. How the federal government calculates this, is this one event? Is it multiple events? How do we get it? You reach that $10.6 million threshold, and then the formula for each county. My team makes sure that I'm very careful about not speculating, but I think what I've seen, I think we will reach those numbers. And of course, we will ask for federal support. I'm grateful today that our federal partners, Senator Smith and Klobuchar, were both in contact. I know that Representative Craig is down in southern Minnesota, all of them again today. We'll be out there with them starting probably tomorrow, start to do this assessments. But that's where it sets right now. I think many of you are doing the math in your head. It doesn't take long to reach those numbers anymore.
Real quickly, just a recognition of not only you can see how dynamic the group is that's working on this. I also want to recognize in the room, in case there's questions for these agencies, we have Commissioner Sarah Stroman here from the Department of Agriculture.
Natural Resources.
Natural Resources, and Commissioner Tom Peterson here from the Department of Agriculture too. Yep. So if there's questions for them too, they're willing and able to answer those.
Governor Ellie Roth with NPR News. Do you have any update on the Rapidan Dam here in Mankato? There's news sites down there are reporting that officials are concerned about the integrity of the dam. Any update on that?
Yeah, the question is about the Rapidan Dam, which I'm very familiar with in that. I do not have any current update on that. I know the structural integrity of the dam has been a question for a long time. The removal of the dam has been a question that's been up there. I don't know if anybody with the agencies has anything further that would come from.
So the question about the Rapidan Dam, we are continuing to monitor with the local officials the status of the dam. We were made aware of the situation about 4 o'clock this morning. We're also looking at the communication cell towers in the area and working to get resources down there to support cellular communications. Right now, the integrity of the dam is intact, but we will continue to monitor it and be aware of what's going on.
What were you notified about at 4 o'clock this morning?
Concerns over the status of the dam and the communications equipment.
Bureau reporter for stations in Rochester, Duluth, Fargo, Mankato, all the ones that are having issues right now. Could we talk a little bit about, obviously we got major flooding projected for here in St. Paul, down in Hastings, but by the time it gets down to Lake City, those projections are a little less minor. I'm sure the Army Corps of Engineers has more to do with that, but how are we able to curtail sort of the flooding that we're seeing further down the Mississippi?
Dan, do you want to take that one, or do you?
I can try.
Okay, and I can back you up.
So the question was regarding further downstream from where the Minnesota flows into the Mississippi here around St. Paul. What are the impacts going to be downstream along the Mississippi? Fortunately, when you're dealing with a river of the magnitude of the Mississippi, it can handle a lot more water. And so in this case, most of the water is being channeled from one particular basin, which is the Minnesota, and that's why we're going to have those impacts in St. Paul. Once it gets into the Mississippi, as you mentioned, we're expecting more on the order of moderate flooding, which is still to be taken seriously, of course. The reason we're not getting into the major is just because the Mississippi itself can typically handle some more. You asked about measures to be curtailed, and I'm not sure if anyone here would be able to answer that.
Well, the only thing I would say, and we saw this up in, and this was in Cook, and I think this is where people business owners and homeowners saying they were dry, 4 hours later, they were knee-deep in water, how quickly things happen. What we have now, and we get very familiar with these river gauges from the Weather Service and from the Corps of Engineers, you get a little bit of lead time. We know what's coming on the 28th, and what I'm just shocked by always in learning this is how accurate they are almost down to the hour on where the water's going to move and how high it's going to be. What that allows us to do is start thinking about where resources could be deployed for sandbagging, for pumping operations, and those types of things. Now that we're into this event, and it's going to be a little bit longer spreading out, it's not almost what amounted to almost flash flooding up in the area of Cook and Biwabic so fast. This is going to be a more of a typical spring melt type flood where we'll see the rivers start to rise over time. Gives us a little time to think about it, of what you're going to sandbag, what you're going to, because there were folks saying, look, if I'd had more time, I'd have sandbagged. They didn't, and the prediction was, I don't think anybody was predicting 8 to 10 inches of rain in a matter of a couple hours.
Well, what's the, I don't know, Commissioner, I know you've been out and about, Commissioner Peterson, but what's the situation with the crops? I mean,
Tom, you want to take that? Whoops, excuse me. We can move him up around.
I mean, how bad is it in terms, are they a total loss, or what percentage?
Again, thanks, Tom Peterson, Commissioner for the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And again, too, you think about a lot of stress right now for farmers as they assess those crops especially in southern Minnesota. A lot of our, crop already had to be replanted in certain areas with a rainy season before we even had the rains this week. And so there's crop insurance dates that farmers are going to bump up against now, and so there just is not time to replant those acres. And so what we'll be working on as an administration is there's certain thresholds that each county will have to make. It's 30% of our crop loss of one crop, and then we'll be working with the governor to ask for either a secretarial designation or a presidential designation that'll unlock loans and assistance for farmers. And we'll try to do that as quickly as possible. As I said, I did tour some crops yesterday, and we'll be also out there tomorrow and working closely with our USDA FSA office here in Minnesota.
I mean, how widespread is it though? I mean, how much are you looking at 50% loss?
No.
Statewide, or what's the deal?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and it'll be very spotty. In some areas, if there's other issues that'll come with this. So some counties will have, I would say, will have a hard time making that 30% loss because it's really low areas that are going to be drenched. And but the problem is for those farmers that needed to replant. So that's what we'll be assessing. And so it could be not as widespread as we thought, but farmers are going to have other problems too. They're not able to get their fertilizer on, and then we're going to see, because of the wet conditions, we're going to see issues with pests and other things like that. And so there's a lot of concern right there on the crop that may take several weeks to assess the situation of where we're at. And so that's why, we'll be out working closely with the USDA to try to monitor this and see what the damage will be.
Well, again, we want to thank you all, and I think folks to start wrapping your mind around this. I think we think of the historic floods, 97, 2007, or whatever. We're approaching one of those type of events, and this is going to spread out over the next few weeks. So we're going to have to make sure that we're focusing, make sure that folks continue to look out for their neighbors. We'll continue to monitor this, and again, the relationship and the partnership with the federal government is going to be critical, especially as we start thinking about recovery. So thank you all.